Niger has cut military ties with the United States, a setback from what was once a crucial ally in West Africa. It follows other leaders in the Sahel in forging closer ties with Russia after taking power in military coups. So what impact will this have on the region? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashem Ahelbarra. Just a year ago, Antony Blinken was in Niger, the first ever visit by a US Secretary of State. He hailed the West African country as, quote, a model of resilience, a model of democracy, and a model of cooperation. 5 months later, the military seized power in a coup. Now, Niger is cutting off military ties with Washington and wants its forces to leave. They follow former colonial power fronts whose troops were shown the door last December. Meanwhile, relations with Russia have been deepening, with Moscow's influence increasing in the region. So what's gone wrong so quickly from Washington's point of view, and what does Niger's order for US troops to leave mean for the fight against armed groups in the Sahel? We'll be asking our guests these questions in a few moments, but first, this report from Kulsum Sharif.
Niger's military government says the presence of US armed forces in the country is no longer justified. It's ordered them out with immediate effect, denouncing what it called a condescending attitude of an American delegation in the capital Niamey for talks.
Niger regrets the desire of the American delegation to deny the sovereign Nigerian people the right to choose their partners and the types of partnership capable of helping them to truly fight against terrorism, even though the United States of America has decided unilaterally to suspend all cooperation between our two countries.
The US State Department said the decision to end the military agreement by Niger came after frank discussions about the junta's trajectory. Ties between the two nations have strained since Niger's military took power in a coup last year. Washington suspended some military aid in response, but in December offered to restore ties on some conditions. Since the coup, Niger has turned to Russia for help after it kicked out French troops in December. Neighbouring Mali and Burkina Faso, which have had 2 military coups since 2020, have also turned to Moscow for security support.
As for the Russian Federation, it's a partner with which Niger deals on a state-to-state basis in accordance with military cooperation agreements signed with the previous government to acquire military equipment necessary in its fight against the terrorists who claim thousands of innocent Nigerian victims under the indifferent eye of much of the international community.
Niger has been at the center of US military operations in the Sahel, with a large drone base and hundreds of soldiers stationed there. The Sahel region runs across West Africa, just below the Sahara Desert, where armed groups linked to ISIL and Al-Qaeda have been operating for years. Niger was seen as the last Western ally in the region. The State Department's website described it as a critical actor in regional efforts to counter terrorism and promote stability. But for now, Niger's efforts to combat armed groups in the region will not involve the United States. Kulsum Sharif, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests in Abuja. Idayat Hassan, Senior Associate Non-Resident at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. In London, Alexis Akwagyiram, Managing Director of Semafor Africa. Also in the Nigerian capital, Kabir Adamu, Security and Intelligence Specialist focusing on West Africa and the Sahel region. Great to have you all on in the program. Idayat, how has relations suddenly declined between Niger and the United States of America?
It's quite an interesting development, considering that the U.S. has been the open government engaging with Niger, actually on government-to-government basis. They've sent high-caliber representation from the acting Deputy Secretary of State to the Assistant Secretary of State to several senior, even agreed to actually have their ambassador present our credentials. So I think that there has been some form of openness on the part of the US in terms of working with Niger. But I think for Niger, the problem is that they seem so much fixated on populism. And we do hope that this populism do not eventually lead to isolationism in the region, really, especially considering the security implication this has got for Nigeria, this has got for the whole of West Africa region, really. Thank you.
Alexis, we are yet to understand exactly what happened during that meeting between the U.S. Assistant Secretary of State Molefi and Michael Langley, the commander of U.S. Africa Command, with the top Nigerian officials. But I mean, from what the Nigerians are saying, that basically they didn't like what they describe as a condescending attitude of American officials. Should we sum it up at exactly that point, or there's more to this new row between the Americans and the Nigerians?
I think that's part of it, but I think there is definitely more to this than just a condescending attitude. I think ultimately the crux of the matter is Niger's choice of military partners, and specifically the choice of Russia. The US clearly seems to be frustrated that Niger is moving closer and closer in terms of military cooperation and partnerships with the Russians. And we saw that in the statement from Niger. What they were saying was that the US were trying to deny them the opportunity to choose the military partners that they wanted and the partnerships, the style of partnership that they wanted to pursue. So I think that's ultimately what the problem is. Now, part of it may well be a condescending attitude, because that is a continuation of the type of language that we heard in the immediate aftermath of the coup last July, where Niger, the junta was consistently saying, look, the French have essentially a neo-colonialist attitude and we've had enough of being dictated to. And similarly, we're seeing that type of language emerging again when they refer to this condescending attitude. But specifically, I believe that attitude is in relation to them saying, look, we will not be dictated to with regards to our relationships with Russia.
Kabir, if this is about Russia's growing footprint in Africa's Sahel region, is this still an opportunity for the Americans to build bridges with the authorities in Niger about the need to maintain that partnership while understanding that political reality is changing and that the Africans have the right to have different partners, Russia in particular?
Yeah, I mean, the policy, as it were, of the Biden administration with African countries has been one of partnership. At least that is what has been stated. In practical terms, however, we all know that the focus of the American and most Western countries have been on Ukraine, and that has allowed a lot of development in Africa, perhaps, and other parts of the world to occur without the US sometimes even either taking note, or they are forced to play catch-up. And I think this, to an extent, is what happened in Niger. It took US almost 3-4 months to declare what happened in Niger a coup. And just like the previous speakers mentioned, even after declaring Niger a coup, they remained open to discussing with that military junta, which was a contradiction to what most persons expected. But I think beyond that, the fact that this is an election year in the US, the fact that for President Biden in particular, he would want definitely to make a showcase of the outcome of this particular, I would say, unfortunate development. It seems to me that this is a diminution of the U.S. Influence in Niger, in spite of the fact, like you've mentioned, they've maintained an open relationship with the junta, and in spite of visits by several top U.S. government officials. This announcement is coming from the CNSP. It indicates that. The other point that I think is also crucial to how this will play out is the relationship that has been fostered between the three Guma countries, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, and the influence that Russia had in these three countries. So all of this, I think, in the long run will play a role in the outcome of how this current logjam plays out.
Idayat, did the Americans, in a way or another, underestimate what happened in Mali, which is interconnected with what happened in Burkina Faso, which is interconnected with what happened in Niger, the same problem or the same mistake made by the French?
Yeah, I think the Americans actually did not underestimate that. If you look at the way they have engaged, like we previously mentioned, that the last speaker mentioned, it took months before they could even declare this a coup. There has been lots of backdoor conversation. There's been lots of open conversation. There's been lots of visits. Actually, most of the states are trying to learn from their mistakes in Burkina and in Burkina and of course in Mali. And also you will find that while the US claims to actually be backing ECOWAS stance, they've continued to engage on a country-to-country basis, understanding the importance of Niger to their war against terrorism. So there is actually no underestimation. I think there is just a different way of doing things by the military junta, particularly the AES alliance or the AES alliance of Mali, Burkina, and Niger, which is hell-bent on seeing Western powers thrown out. All the attention put by the US actually did not prevent them from getting the French treatment. They still got the French treatment. Now, the question is that with the coming in of Russia, which of course we continue to say that countries should be allowed to preach with who they want to. We should not at any point as Africans be asked to choose between the West, the US, for instance, or Russia. We should actually have the opportunity to engage at whatever level and on whatever basis we want with this country. But the reality is also quite stark. You are talking that now collectively more than 2,500 soldiers will be pulled out eventually from Niger. When that happens, is it the 100 that the Africa Corps Russia is able to provide with the rechristened Wagner that will be enough to deal with all the internal security challenge with trans-border implication for the Sahel? I think this is actually bigger than what we are actually seeing, more so as we see conflict move into coastal West Africa.
Alexis, 2012 was a turning point in the sense that groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIL decided to shift their presence from the Middle East to the Sahel region. The French decided to set up a presence in Mali, and then they were forced by many other countries. That changed when the Malians said, we don't want any foreign troops there. So everybody relocated to Niger. Now they're being kicked out from Niger. What does that mean for the future fight against these groups?
I think Idayat, who spoke before, hit the nail on the head. I think this does leave Niger and also Burkina Faso and Mali extremely exposed, ultimately, because I don't think that they have the capabilities to make up those numbers. When you push out all of those Western troops, you can see an attempt to try and make up the numbers by forming a security pact between themselves and turning to Russia. But I don't think that's going to make the shortfall. It's not in terms of numbers. It's certainly not in terms of capabilities, because if you look at this US base, for example, their ability to maintain surveillance across the Sahel, across a number of different competing situations in different borders and across different groups, that's a huge capability that's being removed and is not being replaced. So I think the implication is that with time, the security situation is going to deteriorate in Niger, but then also we've seen it happen already in Burkina Faso and in Mali, and I think that deterioration will continue.
Kabir, it was that military pact signed between the Americans and Niger in 2014 that paved the way for the Americans to put for more infrastructure, particularly in Agadez and in the capital, in Niamey, to try to contain the ever-growing rise of the armed groups in the Sahel region. Are the Americans likely to further lose the fight against these armed groups if they are denied permanent presence in a crucial place such as Niger?
Well, I think it's absolutely important that we appreciate the fact that before the Americans, the African countries that are affected by this, the activities of these armed groups, more or less more, inclined to want to either address them, contain them, or in the best circumstance, get rid of them. And so there are two major issues that I would say my previous speakers did not mention. And this is the fact that over time, we have seen in real terms, and I say this with all sense of responsibility, a failure of the partnership to achieve in measurable terms the interests both of the countries and then, of course, with the partnership that has been arrived at. And it's not, I would say I'm not overreaching if I say at the moment the Sahel region remains, in spite of these partnerships, the center spot for terrorism in the world, where several armed groups are active in spite of this operation. So these questions have led to the populism that, and of course, they are the basis for which these juntas have been riding. It's also a little bit difficult to conclude, in spite of the fact that we all agree that their action is illegal, as it were, but to, given the circumstances that they've arisen, to say that there has been a deterioration in the security circumstances. Yes, incidents are occurring, but if you compare them to the time when partnerships were active, I wouldn't use the word deterioration. So point I'm trying to make is it is time for a reality check for the types of partnership, the types of agreement, and then of course the objectives of those agreements. If African countries are saying that we're not getting the best out of those agreements, and it is the reason why we're seeing this type of actions, then perhaps, especially, and I want to emphasize this point, the security sector reform training, support that has been coming under different forms from Western countries to Africa, in reality, is very effective. And I think this is the result of what we're seeing in several African countries, including Niger.
Okay. Idayat, in Niger, in Mali, and in Burkina Faso, the junta leaders have been saying that the reason why they said to the foreign troops to leave is basically because their fight against ISIL, Al-Qaeda and other affiliated groups was not efficient. To the contrary, they saw the potential for more anti-Western sentiment spreading across the region, which could have a huge impact on their own personal survival. Does that make sense to you in a way or another, or is it just part of the populist trend which has been prevailing there?
I think really it's more part of the populist trend. When you look at it, aside from the gains that was made with Kidal in Mali, there's not been any substantial gains that we have actually seen. When you look at Burkina Faso, the numbers of people being killed have actually increased. Less than 2 weeks ago, there were more than 150 people killed. And the conflict itself is actually moving. That's one thing that we should actually take cognizance of. The sophistication of the actors, the proliferation of the actors. In 2012, we were basically just dealing with MNLA, and then the other groups came in. Now we're dealing with multiple groups, CMA, ISL, SGS. They're just like multiple groups we're actually dealing with. Then the sites keep moving. So we say from the north of the country, in places like Burkina, conflict is actually moving to the eastern Burkina as well. So in real time, when we look at it, it's not as if there is actually substantial progress. We are sloganeering and we are making a lot of resort to non-vigilante groups whom themselves commit so much huge human rights violations against civilians, really.
Okay, Alexis, this is an area that has had a long history of bad governance, rebellions, long cycles of drought, and now the presence of armed groups, which have further expanded their influence from tiny groups operating in northern Mali all the way to posing serious threats to countries like Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal and Guinea. Could it be the moment of reckoning for the Americans on the need to reinvent the way they've been dealing with these groups?
I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a moment of reckoning for the Americans, because I think it's a huge country that's very insular in the way in which it views the world. And I think maybe they might reassess to some extent, but I don't think I'd go so far as to say it's a moment of reckoning. And just to expand on a previous point that I made, I would say something else that we haven't touched on in depth has been the fact that it's not just the partnership with Western countries that have fallen by the wayside. These countries are looking to leave ECOWAS as well. So they're not looking to work with African partners. They're not looking to share information, which is crucial. And we've got to bear in mind the relationship between these countries with porous borders. So, for example, the situation in Nigeria in terms of security is difficult to say the least. The security forces are overstretched, and so we're seeing problems in the northeast, which has been the case for more than a decade in terms of Islamic State, and then also latterly Boko Haram, although that's a diminished group. And then in the northwest, we're seeing the so-called bandits, so these criminal gangs that are roving in ungoverned spaces. And when you see the groups, let's say Islamic State around the Lake Chad region, and then the so-called bandits, they can roam freely. Now, without proper communication between African countries, so then there are going to be more and more of these problems. And that will come if Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger say that, let's say, for example, they're not going to speak to ECOWAS, they're not going to speak to Nigeria, and then they're not going to speak to Western partners as well.
Okay, Kabir, so we've reached this point, this critical junction where you have the Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso pulling out from the G5, which was instrumental in the fight against the insurgency, threatening to pull out from the ECOWAS. Where does it leave other countries like Mauritania and Chad, which are still insisting we would like to be still part of the G5? Where does it leave the entire fight against these groups, which are further expanding their influence?
Frankly, in a very precarious circumstance, the G5 is as good as dead. The major countries, I mean, the headquarters was in Mali. There was planned to move it to Niger, and then, of course, the coup happened in July. So it's as good as dead. And that, to an extent, has brought almost to a standstill the regional cooperation. Of course, you have the multinational joint task force that is in Chad, and for which Niger is also a member, and then, of course, Chad as well. But then the fact that you have that wide gaping hole that is the Sahel, vulnerable, and for which we've already discussed the multiplicity of factors and the multitude of groups that are operational. And like I said earlier on, this is more or less the center spot for terrorist activities in the world at the moment. And then you have the regional cooperation that is meant to address that almost collapsing. So that's a huge challenge. I think the regional body ECOWAS and other powers like the US and the EU need to come together. One possible option, of course, is to strengthen the multinational joint task force and, of course, increase the sharing of intelligence as well as the capacity of...
I have different angles to discuss with you. So I appreciate if you can give me some short answers. Idayat, does Russia have all it takes now to take over and replace America and France in the Sahel region?
No. No, I think that Russia does not have even the geographical knowledge, the on-ground knowledge of being in West Africa and the Sahel like the French or the US have. And the conflict, the insecurity is actually too much for just one country with very small numbers to manage. And by the antecedents in Central African Republic and places where operated, it is not going to be who for those countries and for the rest of West Africa. This is more a West African problem than a United States of America or France problem.
Alexis, they may not have the know-how, though they have more incentives, more cash, more weapons to deliver to those countries. And also the successor of Wagner, which is the Africa Corps, is operating in many parts of the Sahel region.
I'm not convinced they have the same necessary incentive. I think the incentive for the West is that there was a concern that the Sahel region would become a hotbed for insurgencies that might come and haunt them at home. So insurgents might come and launch attacks somewhere in Europe or in the US. I don't think Russia's concerned about that. What the Russians would be looking to get out of these relationships, and they are getting, is access to minerals, resources. They want access to gold, for example. They want access to diamonds if they get hold of that. Just that's what they want. And they can readily get access to the things that they want and make some money out of these endeavours. But they don't have the same incentive about concerns, because I don't believe they fear anybody's going to attack them over in Russia.
Mm-hmm. Kabir, do you see the potential for the Sahel region, West African countries, to break away from traditional allies, former colonial powers, the Americans, and embrace more partnerships with the Russians and the Chinese in particular in the future?
Yes, unfortunately, and I'm being realistic. The current arrangements is not meeting the needs of some of these countries, and that is what the AES alliance have demonstrated. And if more countries see, we don't yet know what the outcome of the actions by the AES would be. If they see it as being successful, then of course more countries would toe that line. And let's not forget that the economies of these countries were battered by COVID-19 and then the current circumstances of the world at the moment. And so they are in need of aid. And if the West is not providing that aid, and China, Russia trying to do that, then of course they are likely to tilt in that direction.
Mm-hmm. Idayat, any concerns here that groups such as Jama'at al-Islam wal-Muslimin led by Ayad Ghali could take advantage of this situation along with Kba Masina and further move south, east, north?
Yeah, I think that's just the reality. The truth of the matter is that with this open, opaque system, openness in terms of the border, not enough support, you expect to see these groups from CMI, all these groups to actually resurrect with actually much more group even evolving in this in the next couple of months. What we have on our hand is a state of emergency.
Alexis, we've been asking questions about what politicians think about these current situations. Let me ask you this question and give me a very short answer if you don't mind. What are people in Africa thinking about all these latest developments?
I mean, I think people are largely in support of the idea that we will not be dictated to. I mean, I think there is something that has been tapped into, a popular sentiment about enough is enough, particularly with the France Afrique project.
And we'll have to leave it there. I really appreciate your insight. Idayat, Hassan, Alexis, Akwagyiram, Kabir Adamu, thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.